Hi and welcome to this second episode of our tutorial series about extending Pano2VR with JavaScript. In this tutorial I want to share some thoughts about a proper project setup you may do when it comes to add your own JavaScript files to a Pano2VR project and how to use external software to make this work easy. When you hit the cogwheel button in Pano2VR to generate the output, Pano2VR does all its technical magic in the background and you don't need to care about what's happening here. Pano2VR is managing all the folders and files needed for the output and for a functional project you can upload to the web, and you don't need to care about anything. And if you want to extend Pano2VR with JavaScript, you need to add something and you need to be aware of how a project is set up when you want to export it together with your own files. To demonstrate a proper project setup, I have assembled a small virtual tour with 6 panoramas. There's nothing special in it. The only thing I have added was a custom property to the hotspots to make them not only show upwards but also show to different directions. So here the arrow direction is left. It's interpreted in the skin to rotate the arrows in the skin. Here we have an arrow up, arrow right, when it makes sense from the orientation in the room to have a point forward or to a location downstairs or turning right, so to reflect a little bit the geometrical situation in this location. That's everything we need to know about the structure of the tour. When it comes to the skin, I started with a blank skin, only added a node hotspot. Here is the arrow icon, and this arrow icon is turned with a logic block left, right, down by certain angles to make these directional arrows happen. And besides that, we have a side menu made from a cloner with a node image and so on, nothing special, a menu button and a title on the top with the text of the user data title. So absolutely nothing special. I intentionally kept this skin extremely simple so you can more focus on the parts we introduce into the skin which have to do with JavaScript. When it comes to integrate JavaScript into the skin, we have basically 3 ways of doing it. And to demonstrate this, I have prepared a component containing 3 elements to show just these 3 methods. Here it is in my component library. I have a prefabricated component and integrated into the skin. And now let's see what is living in here. The first approach to have JavaScript executed from within the skin is to use a text field. This approach is already working in Pano2VR version 6 and is still valid to do so in Pano2VR version 7. If you have a text field and you start this text with JavaScript : then everything what follows will be not printed out, it will be executed as a JavaScript. And here we have an alert, so we have a little pop-up box and we have a text in this pop-up box written here. And if I save it here and I'm going to the output, let's output it here, and you get hello from text field, just the text I typed in there. So let's just put the live project on the first tab and the final project on the second tab. So if I now hit OK, there comes some other stuff I will explain later. And you see the screen is black on the first alert, and even it stays black until the second alert is confirmed with OK. So these commands are blocking the build-up of the skin. And this is predictable, as this script line is integrated into skin.js. And skin.js is the JavaScript which builds up the skin in the user's browser. And if it's stopped by a command which throws an alert which needs to be confirmed, then this whole skin.js script is stopped. So if you build in some JavaScript this way into the skin, be aware that it should not stop the whole script. Then you can run into problems. That's the first method. The other method is we have a text button with an action. And here I wrote click me, and we have an action here, mouse click. And mouse clicks can have an action, or any other events can have an action with go to URL, and inside you don't write a URL like http:// and so on. You just enter a JavaScript command by also starting JavaScript : and then starting your JavaScript command. Here we have hello from text button, and if I hit OK, and save it, go to the browser, hello from text field, this is the first command, and here's the hello from code block I discussed later. And now we have this click button. This click button is not blocking skin.js, as it waits for a mouse click. It does nothing until I click it, and then I get the command. And here we have the command pop up in front of the already assembled panorama, because it hasn't blocked the buildup of the whole project. So these are the two methods which are working in version 6 and version 7. And the new feature in version 7 is the code block. And the code element we have can be filled with JavaScript, and this is this part. Basically, it does the same as the text field, but you don't need the prefix JavaScript : just type the plain JavaScript command into it. This code element is also integrated into skin.js, so if you put some commands in here which are blocking the execution of the whole JavaScript, it will interrupt skin.js and pause the building up of the skin or building up the whole panorama project in the user's browser. So be careful with commands which are blocking and need some user interaction before they can continue. And this is a second command which is coming when you reload the text field. Now it comes from the code block, and now we have the ready panorama, and the JavaScript button is still waiting for user interaction. These are the three ways of integrating a JavaScript command into a skin. After we have seen the blocking function of some JavaScript code waiting for user interaction inside of the skin and inside of skin.js might induce some problems. And there are some other approaches which I want to discuss now and in the next sections. We can have some timing problems. When you load JavaScript in the browser, it is pretty important when this JavaScript was loaded. Let's have a look at our project, and I hit the F12 key to open the developer panel and just reload the project and see the files coming down from the server. You see you have an index.html, then the index.html loads the Pano2VR.js and then loads the skin.js. And the skin.js needs to be finished to have the complete user interface, to have all hotspots and all interaction elements and all functions you need to navigate from one panorama to another and so on. And the panorama player needs to have its loading finished to be able to load all the images and to display them in the panorama viewer. Everything else is loaded afterwards. And here we have some timing issues if something gets blocked. So if you want to have more control about when something is happening, then it's better to use external files to host your JavaScript you want to add to your project. If we have a look at Skin.js, and let's have it open in a new tab so you can read it. And now let's have a look to our JavaScript inserts we made. I hit Command F and now let's search for code block. And this section here is just one code line inside of the huge amount of code you have here in this Skin.js. And you have no really control when this command is fired. So there's a lot of uncertainty you introduce into your project if you're using JavaScript right away from inside the skin. Especially when it's timing critical. If you are using JavaScript for user interactions, then it's no problem. So here we have click me, it's only reacting on a user interaction, and so it's no problem, it's just waiting for you. But everything what needs to run automatically on start of the panorama or during the panorama can be timing critical, and it's better to have control over it if you use it in an external file where you can define when it's loaded and how it's loaded. And you can have much more control when this external file is finished and ready to operate. And another advantage we will see in the next section is if you edit your JavaScript code in an external editor, it is much more comfortable than it is here, where you just type in text with no error control and so on. And we see the big difference when using a professional code editor to edit this text, this JavaScript code, not inside a text field or inside of a code block or inside of an action box. Here, this is the maximum comfort you can have here, and the convenience is pretty limited inside of Pano2VR. It's no problem, and it's not the main focus of Pano2VR. The main focus is a no-code operation, and these text fields are as simple as possible. And coding inside of Pano2VR is not the main focus of the program, but it can be done, and that's what we are talking about all the time here. And we need to get it a little bit more convenient and more professional, and that's what we are covering in the next section about using an external code editor to fabricate code which is cooperating with the skin and the panorama player. Now let's have a look how to integrate an external JavaScript into a Pano2VR project. Let's take some action here. I just copy this JavaScript code here inside the skin, and I want to have this code living in an external file, and this file should be integrated into a Pano2VR project, so it is exported together with the normal output we usually have when we hit the cockpit button. So let's copy this code, and now let's change to the Finder or Explorer, and we have our project folder here. And this is our skin, and this is our Pano2VR file, and we have the output folder with everything we see in the browser, and here are my 6 panoramas. I enter a new folder. Let's name it my JS folder. And inside of this folder, let's create a text file. And let's save it, save as my JS folder, and let's save it as my JS file. And now we need the extension .js to make sure that it is recognized as a JavaScript file. Save. And now let's paste the JavaScript code inside the text. Nothing else before, nothing after it, and just save it. Now we have this file living here along with our project in a special folder. And this folder now needs to be integrated into the project. We can do it with two actions we need to have. The first action is we need to make sure that this folder is copied to the output when the project is exported by hitting the cogwheel button. And now let's do this first. We go to the output, and the output has properties on the left side. And if you scroll down and open the advanced section here, then you will find at the very end assets. And this asset section in the output panel allows Pano2VR to copy other stuff which is usually not integrated into the output additionally to the output. You can add single files, or you can add a whole folder, and the folder with this content is integrated into the output. This is my folder. It will be copied to output, including this JavaScript file in it. Open it, and then it is listed here. And if I now hit the cogwheel button, then we see in the Finder, let's change to the Finder, you see it in the output. And where is it? Now we have a folder assets. It's named after this panel. It's always the same. It always looks like this. And we have here some other folder which doesn't belong to here. And now we have assets, my JS folder, my JS file inside of it. And it is copied to the output. But we need to have some changes. Hello from my external JS file, to distinguish it from the other commands we have inside of our skin. So save it, and to make it operational, you always need to save an external file and then to hit the cogwheel button, or in Pano2VR 7 just save it. Then you have an update and a live update here. And now let's have a look what we are loading here. And so hello from text field, bum 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 bum. And now let's have a look at our network, and maybe we will find this file here, but we don't. You don't see my JS file here. That has a reason. The operation we need consists of two parts. First part is make sure it is copied to the output via the asset folder. That's the step one. We finished already. But now we need the project to make sure that this file is loaded in the user's browser. It is just copied, so it is prepared to be loaded, but it isn't loaded really. This is the next operation we need to do. Let's go to the skin, and we have two places where we can do this. The first place is if you click in the empty area so that nothing is selected in the element tree, then you get the general properties of the skin. And there we have, at the bottom we have external files. And now let's click on typed or double click on type or on the plus sign, and we can select, is this external file which should be loaded a CSS file for styling and so on, or is it a JavaScript file? First we need a JavaScript file, and now you need to type, you need to do it manually. Now we need to type in the path to this JavaScript file we want to have, and we are operating from within our output folder. We have the skin.js, and inside of skin.js there will be, the loading will be induced, and we have inside of this folder we have assets, my.js folder, my.js file. Now let's do this. Assets slash my underscore asset, or just copy it to be sure we have no typo in it, and my underscore js file.js. So let's correct everything and double check it. There's no error warning or anything like this. You really should be sure that is correct what you're typing here. Now when we save, you will induce automatically a reload in the main app, and if you change to the browser you should have a loading process, and even before you can before you confirm all these boxes here, you have these file loaded, and you can see my JS file.js, and if you reload you get this first. That is pretty interesting, as this file is loaded by index.html, and we need to confirm it by just hitting Command U to get the source code of the index.html, and what I've entered in the skin is introduced into the HTML file, into index.html. It is copied to here, and this makes sure that this file is loaded very early, while skin.js is already loaded and working and is in our case blocked by our alert. This file is already loaded and operational, and so this alert comes first because it is faster than it's only one line. This is a little bit smaller than this one. So you have, when the panorama starts working, if everything is confirmed. So this is a good example of how timing works when you are loading JavaScript files, and this is a way how you can do it. And there's an alternative. This loading line with external files can also be used inside of a code block. You see this here, the same expression, external files. You can do pretty much the same here. JavaScript, CSS and JavaScript files can be loaded here, and the difference is here it is focused on the project and this special skin, and if you have it in a code block, as I introduce this with a component, you can save these files within the code block. That's pretty convenient if you want JavaScript be part of a component. These are the two ways to link and load these JavaScript files, and here we need to make sure that these external files are really loaded and copied to the output. Otherwise, the loading introduced here would fail, because this file wouldn't be present if it's not copied to the output folder. So we always have two steps. Make sure the asset folder and the asset copying is working, and then initiate the loading in the skin, either in the general properties or in the code block section with external files. As we have now two programs working together, on one side Pano2VR, as we are used to, And on the other hand, we have now a code editor. It is just our simple text editor here. And we have a place to edit here, and we have a place to edit here. You need to get used to this sequence, how to operate these two programs together. So let's just do another rehearse to make it more clear. I just kick out this component here and return to my original skin, except this JavaScript loading of this external file. I save it and I change this. And now let's change this JavaScript file. I don't want to have this blocking alert. I want to have an output in the console of the web browser. So let's type console.log, and this is an output which is silently in the web developer. It's not blocking anything. Just save it, and after you save this external file, just change to Pano2VR, save it, and with saving it you get a reload in the browser. And now let's reload it, and hello from my external file. And this is the old version. Now let's have the new version. If you save the skin, not all changes are coming through. Save in the main app, then you have a reload, or hit the generate output button from here, or use Alt Command G. Doing it here to initiate an output. And now we have no blocking alert box, but you have here in the console hello from my external JS file, and this is coming from my JS file from line 1. And here we have the origin of this JavaScript call, and now it is non-blocking because it's not throwing an alert, which you need to confirm. And so this is the sequence you have: edit external file, change to Pano2VR, and generate or save the project, and then it is live. So the changed file is copied by Pano2VR into the output, and then we have a refresh here and we see the ready updated JavaScript file here in our browser. In this section of our tutorial, let's have a look on dedicated code editors and what we can do with them, and how we need to configure them to make the work with our Pano2VR project as convenient as possible. When we have our normal text editor, it's pretty much the same as Notepad on Windows. We have this JavaScript code. Is a little bit better readable than in the text boxes of Pano2VR, but it is just plain text, nothing else. And there is, for instance, there is no error warnings or no code correction or something like that. And you can have a lot more convenience if you're using a dedicated code editor. So let's have a look at some editors. I have put together a little selection to have a view on some apps which are popular in this area, a lot more than I have listed here. Let's just show some of them. Barebones Edit is a very old Mac editor. It is a paid version, but you can use it in a free mode with some reduced features, which is pretty okay for what we want. And it is very old, and it is a Mac only program, and I have used it for many years, and it's a really nice program. And you see the code is colored, and you have indents to make the code better readable and more structured. And then we have, for example, kind of the Windows counterpart. We have a Notepad++, which is very popular in Windows. It is free, and you can just download it and start away. Then we have a paid program, which is Sublime Text, which is also very old. It is available for Mac, Linux, and Windows. Then we have a free version. It is Atom, and it is an open source program. It is free for all platforms, and it is also recommendable. It's very fast because it's a really slim design, and it's a bit outdated now, but it's still working, and it is recommended to have a look on it. Then we come to more commercial software like Adobe Dreamweaver. If you have the Adobe Creative Cloud running, then in the full cloud you have Dreamweaver as a web editor, and it has also a very sophisticated code editor, as you see here. And of course it is able to do a lot more than only code editing. So it is a little bit on the expensive side and a very special tool, and that is what I'm using most of the time. Not WebStorm, there's a companion, it's called PHP Storm, and we have a company, JetBrains. They are specialized on code developer tools for a lot of programming languages, and among them is WebStorm. It is specialized for JavaScript and web production, and it is a project-oriented tool, and you have a lot of little helpers here which are reacting to your code, and kind of the program understands what you're writing and is correcting you, makes suggestion, and even some AI features are coming up now with suggestion to make better code or to make it more easy for you to document your code, and so on and so on. It's not really cheap, but it's an absolutely professional program. And last but not least, I think it's one of the most popular code editors ever. I just forgot the JetBrains apps are for Mac and for Windows. And then we have Visual Studio Code. It is an open source program, but it is hosted and operated by Microsoft. And it is a very slim program, but you can extend it with thousands of extensions. And it runs on Mac and Windows, and you see it is for many programming languages, among that JavaScript, HTML, and so on. And in our tutorials we will use it as it's free, and you can start away really easy and with little to no configuration. We make a little bit tweaking to the program to make it better fit our needs. And I will start with this program as an external editor, or when it comes to add your own JavaScript to a Pano2VR project. So now let's have a look on Visual Studio Code and see why it's such a big recommendation for a free code editor. And let's change to the Finder and just have a first look with opening our JavaScript file with Visual Studio Code. And you see the very simple interface, and you see, compared with the simple text editor we had before, we have some coloring here, and you see the yellow brackets, and if you hover with the mouse on it, okay, it's a method console, it expects some data, and you see MDN reference, and you can click here on any of these bubbles, and if you click on MDN reference, then you can open the Mozilla Developer Network and have just that code piece you are clicking on or hovering on with the mouse explained with all its syntax specifications and all the tech behind it. And here on the sidebar we have the files. Currently is only one file open, and we have some searches, and what we have also, and this is this button here with the extensions. Here you have thousands of extensions to enhance the features of Visual Studio Code and to make it more versatile, to make it more powerful, or to make it fit special needs or special programming languages, like, for example, as it pops up right here, Extend script is a script language for Adobe applications, and you have an editor extension to understand this code and so on. It is very difficult to find the right stuff here. It needs a little bit of testing and recommendations. And for our project, I will only install a small set of 4 extensions to make our work a little bit more convenient. I will do this later, and I will just demonstrate some other features we will use and which are very, very useful. We can have workspaces. We not only have a focus on one file after we have opened it, but we can also have a whole list of files, and you not only can open files but open whole folders, and we do this later when we set up our project. And you can have settings here below, and I have features I need only for special projects. And so you can have an other set of settings or another set of extensions for your needs. And behind Visual Studio Code, there's a large development community which is taking care of it, and you have frequent updates, and it is a very vivid ecosystem, and it is always up to date. It's really a heavy recommendation, and so we will use it for our project here, with some little extra extensions I'll install later. To start with VS Code, we just generate now a workspace. The first step is opening a folder, and now we take our whole folder. Just here it is our O2 development setup, because we need to have all these files here under the scope of our application here. Just open it, and then you get a file list on the right side. You had a welcome here, we can dismiss it, and now we have development setup as a folder, and here's our JavaScript file, and now we have it inside of our file structure, and you can unfold the output folder. So let's have a look at the index.html. We see all code is really understood by the program and colored and indented and pretty nice to read. And even in longer documents, you have this code lens here, and you can see, okay, that's the area I want to navigate to. And we have the Pano2VR player with all this obfuscated code here, but the header you see with the license info or some other types of stuff, or you can inspect the tour XML, so it also understands XML files and does a proper coloring to make this code pretty nice readable, and so on. And now, as we have this project open, let's save this as a workspace. I usually started with an underscore, so it stands on top on a Mac. You can have other naming conventions for your own. And now it is a workspace. And you see this workspace title here, it's a folder name. And we have also a file here, .code workspace. This is the extension here for this project. And if you want to open the whole project, just double click this, and Visual Studio Code opens with the workspace and having all these files in this tree here. Besides having a workspace, you can also have settings and profiles. You see this little cogwheel here in the lower left corner. You can manage profiles. As I said, I have some profiles for some projects. I have made a blank profile here now for this tutorial. There is nothing installed. It is just plain out of the box what the program is able to do now, and we will extend it a little bit to make it a bit more convenient and to add some features which are pretty useful for our work. To enhance the features of Visual Studio Code, let's now install some extensions which are pretty useful for our work. And I'll change to the extensions tab here on the left side, and we have now installed nothing recommended. There are some of them, and popular there are thousands of them. And now let's get the 4 extensions I want to have. The first extension is Prettier. You see it have 48 million downloads, so it is pretty much a standard. Just let's install it. And I'm installing it now into my blank profile, so it's only for this profile. And after clicking it, it's installed. And Prettier is a code formatter for a lot of programming languages, especially for web tech. And for the web languages, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and so on. And it is very nice to read, and it is colorizing code and so on. And the next one is called ESLint. It is a JavaScript code checker, and let's install it. And there is another extensions I want to have. It is XML, and there are different ones, and I'm using the Red Hat version. Install it, and it is pretty nice to control stuff when we need to inspect the XML file Pano2VR generates, or if you need to find something in the Pano2VR file. Let's go just have a short look at the Pano2VR file itself. It is an XML file, and you can read it. You find here the file name of the panoramas and hotspot data and so on. And if you want to tweak something in here, you can do it just by editing the closed file by XML. Don't edit an open file, that's dangerous. And now let's have the last one, ESLint, Prettier, and now we need a 4th one, and it is called Better Comments. Comments, and this, let's install it. And Better Comments is writing comments inside of JavaScript with some extra characters to color them and to make notes to self, to do, or warnings and so on. We will use it by time and install this. Additionally, it's a pretty nice convenience tool. And if we now clear this off, we have these 4 extensions installed for our needs. So, and if we open our JS file here, if we write a normal command, it's green. And then we have a special command with some enhancement, important, and we have something to do. Then we write this and fix it, and so on. And so we can have some structured documentation inside of our code. Everything what is comment is not operational. It is just ignored when it's executed, but for ourselves it is pretty nice to have some documentation, or what is the next line doing, or some hints, or whatever. I will make use of comments a lot during this tutorial. So this is the installation of some extensions for VS Code, just for having a little bit more convenience and some enhanced features for our work inside of a Pano2VR project. Before starting to work with VS Code, let's tweak some settings, which is pretty useful and avoids some popular errors when working with JavaScript code. So let's head over to the settings, and inside the settings, which are pretty much, let's search for the word quote. And you have single and double quotes when you work with code languages. And so let's search for the word quote, and we have in Prettier, which is our code formatting extensions, use single quotes instead of double quotes. And in JavaScript also set it to single quotes. This is for the app, this is for Prettier. and let's scroll a little bit down, and that should be okay. And now let's search for save, and we have editor format on save. This checkbox should be on. This is for formatting the code when you save the file, and so you don't need to do it manually. It's working automatically. These three settings can be set to make the work a little bit easier, and especially the single quote setting is pretty important, as we can do stuff like this. You have a string, a character sequence here inside single quotes. This is the sign for JavaScript. Okay, this is a string, and output the string to the console. When the strings itself contains quotes, then you can use double quotes, and they will be part of the string. They are not operational as a separator as it is here with the single quotes. And it is especially useful if you enter some HTML here. If you, for example, have a link in HTML, then you need an attribute for it. This is a HTML link, and this is a text, and this is the URL. You type in http:// and so on, and this needs to be in quotes. And if you can use here double quotes and outside single quotes, these are just text to output. We will use it later in this tutorial series on different places, so it's important to have the JavaScript strings always wrapped into single quotes. It's a pretty important setting, and it saves a lot of work in later projects if you make it a general setting just here. In this tutorial section, I would like to discuss a proper project setup to show some best practices or tips and tricks to keep your project tidy and well structured. As a first point, let's have a look at our skin we are using. When I go to the output panel in Pano2VR, you see here is my skin, and in front of it there is a $D sign marking this is the skin living in our project directory. $D is a placeholder for the project folder the Pano2VR file lives in. So if you here see the path, this is a folder, and here the skin. And if we have a look at our Finder window, this is a folder, here's the skin, and here's the Pano2VR file. If this $D is missing, then the skins listed here are living in the users folder, the user library folder. On the Mac, you can locate them by going into the preferences and then going to files and have the skin directory. This is the path on a Mac. On Windows, you have, instead of this part, you have appdata/roaming/ Garden Gnome software and so on. It's pretty much the same structure as it is on the Mac. And it is very important to have the skin you're working with on a project move into the project folder. Otherwise, let's say you have 10 different skins for 10 different clients and you put them all into the folder of your system, then it gets overcrowded and pretty confusing where the skins are, and you're mixing up your own skins with the factory skins. So keeping up the system folder, the system library folder tidy, it's strongly recommended to create the skin in the project folder, or if you use a factory skin, open the factory skin here and save it as your own. I've done it before with let's say Venice underscore, and then let's for example insert the client's name there, and this ggsk file should be stored in the project folder. After having our own skin living in our project folder, let's move on to the folder structure in the Finder or in the Explorer. You remember before we have inserted a JS folder named my.js folder and a custom JS file. Let's remove this and set it up from scratch to have a new structure which is better suited to a real project setup than this little example I did before. You can do it in the Explorer or in the Finder, or you can move on to the workspace of Visual Studio Code. You see this file is now struck through because it doesn't exist anymore, and the folder also is eliminated here. And we have now our project folder. You have the Pano2VR file, the skin file, the panorama, the output file, and inside of this folder, it doesn't matter if you do it in the Finder or in the Explorer or here in this Explorer pane of Visual Studio Code, and it does Finder and Explorer operation as well as copy, delete, rename, and so on. And if you click on a folder and you click on new folder here, or right mouse click new folder, and let this folder call lib for library. It's a common abbreviation for using folders inside of projects with some library stuff, additional files and additional assets and so on. And it's short, and it's pretty common to name things like that in with lib for library. So let's confirm it, and this library folder now needs to be attached to the output as an asset folder. So let's kick it here. It's not valid anymore, and add folder, and now let's add this library folder. And everything what's happening from now on as our own additions or extensions we're doing for this project is living in this folder to keep stuff tidy. And to have only one folder, we need to export with the output when we are hitting the cogwheel to create or to generate the project. From now on, this stays as it is, and we don't need to care anymore about this, and everything else is happening now in the workspace. And here we are adding our future files. So now let's continue with our setup by adding an empty JavaScript file into this library folder. Right mouse click new file, and you can just put in a name here. Usually I start with custom JS, but the name is not important. This naming is just I'm used to do it. And to check whether this file is working, I just put a little console output. This is coming from custom.js, semicolon at the end to finish this command line and save it. So it's just a control whether this file is loaded and working later. And now let's make this work inside of the skin. So we have now added this file, and it is loaded as it's defined in the output folder as an asset folder, so it's no problem. It will be loaded into the output. I will check this by clicking on this trash button here in the output folder and hold it until this pop-up shows up, erase output but keep tiles. So the images won't be recalculated, only everything else will be trashed. And if I now hit the cogwheel button, we get a fresh output excluding the tiles. And if we now have a look at our output, it is already marked here, asset lib custom.js. So everything is looking like it's expected. And now we have everything loaded, but it isn't working. If I reload the project, then we won't see this console message as it is not loaded. It's packed or exported into the output folder, but isn't loaded. Now let's get this stuff to work. Go to the skin, and now we have, from our last section, we have in the external files a connection, a loading command for the JavaScript file, my.js folder, and so on. We deleted that, and we also deleted here. You have 2 points where you can make a skin load external JavaScript files. It's here in the general properties. Please mind you have nothing selected here, or you click into the empty space here to get these general property settings. And I'm usually doing it another way. It has some practical advantages. Let's integrate a code block. Element, click somewhere, it is not visible, so the position doesn't matter. I leave it usually at the top of my elements tree, and I rename it. Usually I'm starting with an underscore to make it a little bit stand out from the rest. Scripts, and actions. And all general stuff, what's happening in the skin or loadings, are now connected to this element. Instead of attaching it generally to this skin, then it will only live with the skin. If you attach it to an element, you can make a component from this element and reuse it. I'm usually using more or less the same structure with external files, and these files can be packed into this element, and it is really nice for reusability of the work you have done here. So now let's go to the code element, and we don't enter anything here, but we are using the external files section to add our files. The first file we already have is assets lib custom.js, and this entry in this element makes the skin load this file. We will test it now. So let's save it, and the browser already reloads it in the background, and we should go to the console. Nothing happens. Let's go to the network tab and check whether we have loaded what we want. So I reloaded it, and if I'm going to the top section, here we have a custom.js. And you see here we have a custom.js, it is cached. So let's make a hard reload by hitting Shift Command R. Or what's better, in the developer pane here, disable cache, so this file will always be reloaded. Let's do it. And now you see on the top, this is coming from custom.js. Now it's really transferred. You see it at the kilobyte figures here. And before there was a remark cached, so changes aren't reflected here. And now you are forcing the browser to always refresh this file. And now we see it's working. So we have now an external JavaScript file which is firmly connected to our project. And all the time I change something here, everything you need to do is to do something here. Let's just add an exclamation mark to make a change. First step, save it here. Go to either the skin editor or the main editor, hit save here, then you get a refresh, then re-output, then go to the browser and see it here. And now you see the exclamation mark at the end of this console output. So this is a standard procedure to get things externalized and to refresh it and to review changes. This will be the case from now on. This procedure: save external code, save in Pano2VR, review in the browser. These 3 steps will be all the time our standard procedure when we make changes at our project. In the next step, let's extend this procedure to another file, and I'm switching to the code editor and add another file into our lib folder. Let's name this file custom.css, and this will be a CSS file used for styling our project and extend the possibility we have in the skin editor and the element properties, where you have a lot of CSS properties you can change, but not all. And sometimes you need some special stuff. Let's name especially box or text shadows. These are not provided in the backend of Pano2VR in the skin editor among the properties, so you need to add them by your own. And some other stuff, especially when it comes to custom fonts, and we will discuss a little bit later. And this file is empty, it exists. And now let's head over to the skin editor and do the same as we have done with our JavaScript file. So you can just copy it because it is the same name, and just CSS at the ending. So now this file is also loaded. Usually I'm setting the CSS files to the top of the list, the JavaScripts afterwards, as it is sometimes important that CSS stuff is already working before JavaScript is loading. There are some use cases where this order may be important. And we come back to this order later with another aspect where it's important. So now we have this empty CSS file, and what I'm most of the time doing to keep things tidy is heading over to the general properties of your skin, just clicking into the empty space outside of the skin area. Then you get these general properties, and you have a section here, embedded style sheet. And you see here already some CSS code inserted, and I open this, mark it all, cut it off to make this field empty, to collect all CSS stuff in a relevant place. And I'm just copying this and moving it to my custom CSS on the top. So let's insert it here, and usually I'm doing a comment here, comments in CSS /* and default skin stuff and so on. So this section is just transferred to another place to keep things tidy. And now we are entering my own stuff. Now this CSS is just transferred here and reformatted, and it is way easier to edit here than you see it in this box here, and this box now is empty. So everything what's having to do with CSS now lives collected in this custom CSS file. So let's save it here and check it in the browser, in the network tab, and here you see the custom CSS file is loaded. Now let's continue to work on the CSS part of this project and to add custom font. There are a lot of ways to do it, and I have some best practices I'm using, as it keeps stuff really tidy and you have not too much code on the right places. And now let's start to add a folder in our workspace here. And in the library we have currently the custom CSS and the custom JS. And we will now add a separate folder called fonts. And to have a place where all font files we are adding soon are living here, to keep this library folder a little bit tidy. And we have now the challenge, how do we get fonts and how do we integrate them into our external CSS files and further in our skin and in our project. Let's point our focus on Google Fonts, and I will integrate a font named Arvo, and so I will add another file, and let's save it as arvo.css to keep all the stuff which is only related to this special font, keeping it away from the custom CSS, so we only need to import this CSS into another. We will see it a little bit later. So this is a very useful structure to have a fonts folder inside of our library folder and a CSS which is referencing the fonts which will be imported here. Let's now head over to Google Fonts and see what we have here and what's offered to us by Google. Here you have the fonts overview and what fonts are available at Google. And let's just have a few thoughts on Google Fonts. They are provided for free and for free usage, either commercial or non-commercial, it doesn't matter. They are provided and hosted by Google. And you have two ways to use them. The one way is you can leave them hosted by Google and just integrate it into your project, or you can download them from Google and integrate them locally into your project, so you have every file under your own control. I'm mentioning this before in the European community. The GDPR is a data privacy rule which is mandatory legally to organize your stuff and to declare whether you are using external services on your website. And as Google is a US company with pretty much different privacy settings or privacy policies as we have in the EU, where this is handled much more strictly, it is not a such good idea to use an US service to provide fonts for your project, as user data like IP addresses are transferred to the United States, which may be a data privacy breach. And this can be legally problematic, as we have seen the last 2 years, where we have some legal issues with people being sued for using Google Fonts on their website. So let's ignore the possibility to let Google provide us the fonts on their server via a CDN, Content Delivery Network. It's very fast, it's a Google hardware structure behind it. So technically it's nice, but legally it is suspicious to create some data privacy breaches. So now let's go the second way and to provide the fonts for us to download and to integrate them as files in our project. I will search for my font, the Arvo. This has 4 styles. Now click on it and we have here get font, got it. And you have some styles here. We are using the regular and the bold. For our project you can select them, and here's some sample text and so on. It is pretty much self-explanatory. And when we hit get font, let's now download all. And before, you can see here, see how to use. And there are some hints on using it. Some of them are useful, some of them not. And this is the download for this folder. And what comes then is a little bit complicated. And for this, some guys have written a really nice tool to get these fonts more or less ready to use for your project. And that's what we will discuss in the next clip. Now let's have a look at a very nice helper tool to get Google Fonts prepared for your own hosting. And let's go to this tool, GWF, Google Web Fonts Helper. And it is a very nice tool to prepare the font you want, or the fonts you want. It can be several as well. And now type your font name into the box, and I want to have the regular, and we have the character set. Sometimes you can select extended character sets. It's not the case here. And we have some font styles. We want to have the additional style here as it is a bold. Bold is usually numbered as a font weight with the number 700. And we now get our code here. And you see what's very important for us is the path where these font files are living and from where it will be loaded. Usually you have different styles here. You have some legacy support, some historic support, so different font file types are loaded, but nowadays you are safe to go only with modern browsers, so you only need these WAV2 files. Everything is okay for that. And so it is very easy to understand and not so much coding. And you see here it's from Chrome, Opera, Firefox 39 and so on. So it's safe to use. The next step is the little box below. And here you see customize folder prefix optional. So now you can configure where your font files are living. And I just switching back for a moment to our project layout. We have an Arvo CSS file and the fonts are living in a font folder, and the code provided here in my window, exactly this code, will be put into the Arvo CSS, and here you can adapt the font prefix, and you see it has changed to fonts Arvo, and that is exactly the path we need as it's relative from the location of our Arvo CSS. And now just copy this stuff and put it into the Arvo CSS. Paste. And now we have everything we need here. Let's save it. And the next step is to get the font themselves just for downloading. And it is nice here to have only the selection loaded, so you don't need any overhead here, and just download this file and put the files into the folder. I have done that already in another folder. So here let's go to Material, Arvo, copy these two files, copy, and this is my original, and paste it here. And now they are living here, and if you're looking at the code, fonts will direct it to the fonts folder, and then you have the files here. And what we have now is the fonts already provided. You have a valid font CSS, and if I now save it here, go to Pano2VR, save it here to have it exported, and then have our file reviewed here. Let's just restart it here, hit F12 to see the network console, and now we have our fonts exported, but it isn't already loaded. One last step is missing now, and we will add it soon. As a last step, we now need to integrate the new font and the associated CSS file, Arvo CSS, into our project, and it's fairly simple. Go to Custom CSS and just make a little bit space on top of the file, because this always needs to be on top. And this is a simple line, as CSS can integrate other CSS files into itself. There's a procedure. It is starting with the @ sign and import URL. You see this Emmet abbreviation. It's a nice occasion to explain it, how this is working in Visual Studio Code. If you start typing, you get some underline marking, okay, I don't know what you really want now, but you get suggestions. And here you have the import URL and the empty brackets, and at this end you have the term Emmet abbreviation. Emmet is a code suggestion system which tries to recognize what you want to type and which has some abbreviation algorithms to speed up typing code. And if you have here a suggestion which is marked, just hit the tab key to get this line filled with the first suggestion. And that's what we want here. And now we need some quotation marks, single quotes. And now we just need to enter arvo.css. Simple as that. And that is a consequence of the file structure I set up here. As the font description files here are isolated but living on the same level as custom CSS, you can just add them with as little code as here is shown. And now this file should be imported. Let's check it. So save it, go to Pano2VR, hit save here to induce a new export and reload in the browser. And if I go to the network tab in the developer tools, there is the Arvo file integrated. What we are missing now is I don't see the font file loaded, but that has a very simple reason. It is living in the export folder. You can check it here by going into the Finder and going to output, assets, lib, fonts, and here they are living. They are exported already, but they are not working. They are not loaded. If you call a font in CSS, it doesn't mean it's really loaded, and it is only loaded if you use it. Let's change the font of the whole skin and make a copy of this line and paste it here and put your cursor somewhere here, and now hit Command/. This is a shortcut for commenting out a line. Its line is set as a comment, meaning it's there but it's not working. Its comments are ignored in the browser. It's just for ourselves. And now let's throw away these fonts here. The Verdana, the Arial, they are fonts. Sans serif at the end, it is a placeholder for a group of fonts without serifs. It is a global variable, kind of, to find a fallback font if nothing of the fonts declared here is found on the system of the user. And now let's enter Arvo. And now this font will be used, and the sans serif, it is a fallback vocabulary. And now let's save it. Let's save it in Pano2VR to export it, and meanwhile we have it in the browser, and you see the font already has changed because the whole skin fonts are changed from the Verdana Arial, and here you see the Arvo font already loaded, as it now is really used. Otherwise it won't load. It's there but it won't load. And now we have this font living in the whole skin, and we have overwritten the general GG skin class, which is literally attached to any element in the skin. This is one reason I have put the default skin stuff into this custom CSS to easily change it here instead of overwriting it. So this is the strategy to get external fonts running in your project. Put the fonts in a font folder, generate a font-specific CSS, and import this into your general custom CSS. You can add several lines of them if you want to use 2 or 3 or 4 fonts. Doesn't matter. You can add as many fonts as you like here. And here you have all the fonts you need. Now I'd like to show you how to use the custom CSS together with our custom font to style an element inside of the skin. You may remember we introduced panorama title in our skin. It's on the upper right corner, and we already used a class here to add this CSS class Pano-title to identify it inside of the inspector pane here. So just type it here, Pano-title, and you may find the respective element. This one is framed here, and the text one is inside here. So now we have this element and an attached class, and we can use it to style it. Let's say we want to have this element bigger, and we want to have it not in the standard Arvo font but in the bold Arvo font. You can do it partly here if you use the text elements, but this is a little bit limited, and especially if you want to work with external fonts, you may have some interferences here. If you use a weight, it's not available and so on. It's recommended, if you use a CSS class here, just leave everything here as it is and do this in the CSS class. So now let's make a declaration here, Pano-title. Then we go on with curly braces, and let's alter the font size. You see, you get, as you start typing, font size, just cursor down, enter, and it will be accepted and completely written here. And now let's say 24 pixels as a new font size. Save. Pano2VR save. Go to browser, and you have a large font here. And it's a normal font of the Arvo. Now let's change this and go to code and add another line into this declaration, and let's say font weight. And now you can enter a 700 or a bold, it's the same, and save, and you see the bold Arvo is now integrated here. Let's now return to JavaScript and continue with our project setup. I'll just close these CSS files as we don't need them now. And we now will add another file to our library. And it will be not a file we created, but a file we get from somewhere. What I'm talking about is named jQuery. jQuery is a JavaScript framework, and it can do a lot of stuff for you, especially when it comes to convenience, to make things simpler, to work with objects, and it is kind of a Swiss Army knife if you want to go with JavaScript and you don't like to write everything explicitly in JavaScript. Simple JavaScript, that means only JavaScript, or sometimes in the programmer slang it's called vanilla JavaScript. It's sometimes really tedious to work with, as some simple things are written in a pretty complicated way or with a lot of redundancies and so on. And that's why jQuery was invented, and nearly all websites on the web are using jQuery as it's so popular and so useful. So now let's get it and integrate it into our project. To get it, enter the download page of jQuery, and now we have some options. Here is the most popular file which is used. You see in the lower left corner of my browser, you will see the path code jQuery.com and jQuery 3.7.1.min.js. The .min means the file is so-called minified. So all spaces, all comments, all unnecessary line breaks are erased, and it is just the pure code, and it is not meant for editing or understanding. It's just working, and it has a very small file size, and it loads fast. That's what's interesting for us. So I have a link here directly to the file. If you click on it or open it in a new tab, you see the code. It's not understandable, and it is really compressed. It is only one line and just with a small comment on top what it's about in general. And then you see a lot of ununderstandable code, and you can just save it here, or what's easier for us is just go to save link as in our project in the lib folder and just save it. So when we go back to our project, we have now this file here integrated, and we now need the same procedure as we did for custom.js. So go to the skin editor, scripts and action to our code element, and now just let's copy this and paste it here just to make it a JavaScript file. So paste it again. And now let's add the file name. It's jQuery 3.7.1.min.js. So we have it integrated into our project and it's loaded. And now let's test it. Export it again to get the jQuery file in our output. Let's control it here. Here it is. It's already loaded. And now we need to test it whether it's working. So there in the console we just see the output from our custom.js. So let's head over to just this file. And in the custom.js let's type something which needs jQuery to work. When it comes to using jQuery, there are some very simple conventions, and we now enter a $sign. Nearly all jQuery commands starting with this $. After that, usually we have a curved bracket, and inside this curved bracket we have a so-called selector, so we can address any element inside our whole HTML document and get information from them, manipulate it. It is a both-way communication. And now let's have the simplest selector we have. It's document. You already get it suggested here. Enter it. And the document object has an event, and one event is just when the document is completely loaded, then the ready event is fired. And when something is fired, you can enter something. What should we do then? And usually this is a function, and a function can have a name but don't need to. So we add an empty curved brace, and after every function we have a curly brace, and let's have here a line break. So now let's define what this function does when the document object fires the ready event. So I'm loaded and then do something. So let's have console.log, we already know that, and let's announce that jQuery is loaded. That's effectively what we are now have here. Enter a semicolon to finish this line and enter a semicolon to finish this block. In this block here, after the curly brace of the function, here you can usually enter all stuff you want to be declared or you want to happen after the document is completely loaded. That's a very important function. We will make use of it at several occasions further on in these tutorials. So let's save it. Then go to the skin editor or to the main app, save it, and then let's reload it. And we get an error. So what's happening here? Uncode reference error. Usually this is thrown, this error, if you are calling an element or an object or something like that, or a function which is not defined and it is not existing, and he's complaining about, I don't know what the $sign is. It has a very simple reason. I introduced this error intentionally to make clear how important the loading order of elements is. let's head over to the skin editor and to our code block, and we have now first loading the CSS. That is okay, and then we have loading the custom JS, and in the custom JS I am calling a function which relies on jQuery, but jQuery is loaded afterwards. So the call here is void, as it cannot know what's happening here. So we need to change the order. Everything what's custom.js is relying on needs to be loaded first. So we have jQuery first, then comes custom.js. Now let's repeat it and let's check for an error. No, jQuery is loaded. Now it's working. So the order in which files are loaded is very important, and usually all libraries or all prefab stuff from JavaScript, you can not only use jQuery, but you have a lot of other files you can use to extend Pano2VR's features. jQuery is only the most important and the most popular. You can have a lot of others, and they usually need to be loaded before you do your own custom code stuff. Custom.js or your own JavaScript library you write should come at the last position in the loading queue. After discussing the right order of loading files, let's now have a closer look on the timing. When is happening what? And for this I will introduce some calls in our skin. Just to name two of them, let's go to the script and actions element, and we want to have an action when the skin loading starts. And let's enter go to URL and let's enter JavaScript and console.log, and let's name it skin start. So I just copy it as I reuse it. Just check it. You need to be careful when having typos. Okay. And let's another one have, which is another event, which is pretty important, config loaded. Config loaded is the moment when the Pano XML file, which describes the structure of your tour, is readily loaded, and the first node is loaded, or the first node starts loading, the skin is stable, and the player construction is stable. So it's really the point where it begins to live. And now let's enter this config loaded. And now let's save it and go to the console. I just use only the console, so we have skin starting. Here we have a message from our custom.js. It's pretty much the earliest. And then we have config loaded. In between, jQuery is loaded. So let's head over to our custom.js file, and here we have first line of custom.js. Here is jQuery loaded, and so we get a little idea of what is happening when. So the skin start is somewhere in between, and I think the best practice is to make sure things are happening when jQuery is loaded and when the configuration is loaded. These two events are a pretty good mark for you to be sure that everything is stable, working, and that you have valid objects to address. Before the config file isn't loaded, or before this event, you don't have a stable object named Pano, but you need that to work, to get all your stuff work. And jQuery loaded is the event when the whole document is stable, that you can use jQuery to address or to manipulate objects inside the skin or inside the whole document. So these thoughts on timing are pretty important to have an idea about the sequence of events happening when you are loading a Pano2VR project in the web browser of the user, and when you add your own JavaScript files to get a correct timing and to avoid addressing objects which aren't existing yet. At the end of this section in our tutorial about development setup, I like to share some best practice tips, and one of them is to use the screen real estate properly when you are having only one monitor, one screen to use. I'm usually try to manually cascade the windows of my apps. So I have the Pano2VR on the upper left, and then followed by the skin editor, so I can see the editor, the main app already. So everything is always visible with a little corner, so you can really click between the different windows. And here's my code editor, here's my browser. Of course, you can use Command tab on the Mac to switch between these windows, but especially when it comes to Pano2VR, there is a useful shortcut, and it is, let's have a look at the menu. I always need to look at because it's I'm used to use it, and it is Command-Alt-K, and with Command-Alt-K you can switch between the main app and the skin app. If you use the program switcher, you only get Pano2VR with one of the two windows being in front, and so it's very useful to have also a clickable possibility to switch between your windows. And if I have my Finder window, I usually put it on the lower left corner to have it at hand if I need it. If you are well equipped and have more than one screen, then it's extremely nice to work with Pano2VR, having the browser on the left screen and having Pano2VR on the right screen. And the luxury class is to having Pano2VR on the center screen and the browser on the left screen and the code editor on the right screen if you have three screens. That's the way I'm working. And for the code screen, my right screen, I have a portrait orientation. I turned around the monitor, the screen, by 90 degrees. And this is a very productive setup if you want to get done your stuff really quickly. This is just a convenience tip. And another tip, if you don't know where to find it, in the preferences you have one little checkbox, and you can turn off a warning, which is pretty annoying if you get it all the time. And you have the second box, confirm override. This box needs a confirm to override the Pano XML, the XML file where the configuration of the whole tool is stored. Usually you want just that, so untick this box to don't get annoyed. It's one click less, and I usually turn it off. As this whole section about project setup is pretty long, I like to give a short wrap up at the end to summarize everything I've talked about in the last 13 clips, and just go to the Finder about the project structure. So integrate the skin into the folder where your Pano2VR file is living to keep things together. Then generate a library, a lib folder where all external files you intend to use are living in. Inside of this, if you want to have custom fonts, generate a font folder, and here you store all your fonts locally to have no hassles with external services and any privacy issues arriving with that. And for each font you use, generate a separate font CSS, and there you declare which fonts and which styles of your fonts are loaded and what font files are belonging to this font. Then if we go back to the Finder, generate a custom CSS, and in the custom CSS it's recommended to integrate all the stuff you find in the general properties of the skin, to move them from the text entry here at embedded style sheets, move it over to the custom CSS and keep it on front to have the possibility to override it later on, especially to change the font generally. The font files are integrated by the import command, always on top of a CSS. And here we are done with CSS, and if you have some elements in your skin you want to alter, just use classes as panel title here, and we have it here under advanced. You enter a CSS class here to make use of it inside of custom CSS. The custom.js file is loaded together with the CSS files in a code element under external files. Keep in mind, always load the CSS files first, and in the JavaScript loading sequence your custom CSS needs to be the last. If you use other libraries like jQuery in our case here, they need to be loaded before loading the custom CSS, and attach all these external files to a separate script and action element, as you can create a component from this selection and reuse this setup later. And so you have only one place in your skin where all this stuff is living. Ignore the external files in the general properties panel, as you have it here reusable. In the general properties panel it is not if you use another skin. If you use a library, usually jQuery is always on board because it is very convenient. With the $sign you can address arbitrary elements in your document and you can manipulate them. You can have a handling for events are happening in this model, and we will cover a lot of this stuff later. And that's pretty much the setup you have for a proper project. And then if you use Visual Studio Code, it has a workspace file storing all this stuff for you, and you can save it here along with your project. Just double click it and you have your whole project for not only editing these files, but only for keeping an eye on the whole project and its structure. And you can use Visual Studio Code and the File Explorer to do any file operations you can also do in the Finder or Explorer on Mac or Windows. So this is hopefully a complete short wrap-up of everything I've discussed in this section of the development setup tutorial. In this last section of the tutorial about the development setup to extend Pano2VR with JavaScript, I want to conclude with a little practical example where we use just this setup to do some work and to develop a little example with a communication from outside to inside and inside to outside. Let's start with Pano2VR, and I'm going into the skin editor. And before I show what I want to achieve, let's have a little text box in the lower left corner of the menu. And this text box should show us the actual node number we are just in our tour. Of course, this can be done easily in Pano2VR skin with some placeholders, but for a practical example, it's easy to understand how the communication from inside to outside and vice versa works. And let's start over to our first step to achieve this, and I'm going to the skin editor. And let's have the lower left corner in our canvas screen here, and I'm adding a text box, just clicking somewhere else to not integrate it in some other containers. And this text box get the name node underscore number. And the text, let's stick with text. The horizontal alignment is left, the vertical alignment is center. I do it with auto size, and it should be arranged at the lower left corner with 1010 from the corner itself. And let's make the text white and remove the background and the border. So let's have a look how it's looking like, and head over to the browser. There we have some text. That's what we want. And now I'm attaching a class to it to make this object inside of our skin accessible by jQuery to manipulate its content. And let's add the class user data node ID, or write it all in lowercase letters with dash. It's a good style to format classes usually. And now let's copy it and save it and get here, and let's have the inspector and search for it. So, and here we have it. So this is the text box, and here we have the inner wrapper of the text box. As I mentioned before, with text boxes in skin, usually we have an outer box. It always has attached the class ggskin_text. This is for measurements, for width, height, and anchor point and distance from the borders. And the inner box is for typography and for text formatting. This is the usual case with text boxes you introduce into your Pano2VR skin. So we have added a new element and attached a class to it, and the class is showing up in the document as we need it. As this text box in the lower left corner is our target, what we want to manipulate, where we want to insert some text, let's now go to the other end of our, let's say, data chain and head over to Visual Studio Code and try to get the node number for us. To initiate this, we need to think about when should this happen, and I'm writing a function first. A function is a repeatable method which can be called from outside and which does always the same from whatever element it's fired. And we use it to react to a skin call, to make the skin call very easy, as we need only to call the function name there, nothing else. It's very shorthand. And so we need to define the function get node ID, and every function needs to have an argument, even if it hasn't one, or if an argument is not needed. We need the curly braces and then the curly braces where you put everything in it, what this function should do when it's called. What is an argument? You can call a function just as it is. That is the case here if you call the function with an empty argument, but you can call a function, and we will use it later a lot of, can call a function with some additional parameters you send to the function when it's called. This can be an arbitrary number of arguments, and can be number, strings, or anything else. But now we just need to call the function, and the function does everything from its own. And now let's head over to call this function. To see whether the function is doing anything, let's simply set a console call log, and I say copy is called to control whether it works. This is a complete function. It says a name, with this name you can call it, and there's something inside of the function what is done when the function is called. So that is for the JavaScript part, it's okay. And now we need a third part of our procedure we want to program is we need to call it. And if you want to have the node number for every node you are in, you need to think about when is this changed, and usually when you enter a new node number is valid. So let's have a call fired every node change, and we can attach it anywhere. And usually, as I named the scripts and functions, and I usually attach actions which are globally and without user interaction, then I enter it here, and let's check the event. Node change after the node is changed. This is a prefabricated event Pano2VR has. And then get URL. And I should have it in my clipboard, get node ID. And of course we need to start with JavaScript colon to call this function to the outside of the skin and not to fire an URL to call a new website or something like that. The JavaScript colon prefix fires this event or this call into the JavaScript environment inside of the browser and not outside to fetch a website from the web. And now let's say OK, and let's have a first test to see whether this works. I've saved here, so we have a reload, and we have get node ID is called. Let's clear the console at the lower side, or just switch to the console. It's empty now. And when I now get to another node, get node ID is called, get node ID is called, we get several calls. No matter from where this call comes, I can use the thumbnail menu, doesn't matter. So the node changed event is globally, and you don't need to attach it to any interactive element of your skin. It's just fired automatically when the node number changes. That's all. But that is exactly what we need. We have now a basic chain from an event in the skin calling a function outside of the skin in the custom.js file. And this custom.js file is outputting something at the console. That's a very typical workflow you need or you can use when you want to establish a new function call with JavaScript, which is coming from inside of Pano2VR. In this next step of our JavaScript function called from a node change in the Pano2VR tour, we need to get the node ID. How can we achieve it to retrieve this information? I mentioned the two main objects we have in Pano2VR. We have the skin object. Just open the console. I'm just emptying it, and let's have the skin. If you type skin, then you get a suggestion what is available as an object. It is a valid object, otherwise here, in this place there wouldn't show up nothing. And if I type a dot, then you get a lot of stuff with elements prefixed by an underscore and so on and so on. And the skin object is the whole construction of our user interface we have, like the thumbnails and the text entries here. And when it comes to check about the nodes, about the structural information we have when the tour is running, then we need the Pano object. And Pano, you see, you get suggestions. There are 3 objects in our page which have the Pano2VR player as an object and VR skin. As Pano is the same as Pano2VR player and skin is the name as Pano2VR skin, there's just different names for the same object. And if I enter a dot, you see the methods and properties and some other stuff which is attached to this Pano object. And if we want to get some informations about this node we are just in, then let's try and guess a little bit what we can have here. Usually if you want to know something from an object, the programmers, it's a good style, name it by get. The opposite is set, to manipulate something, and to get some informations. And we're having some suggestions here: get API version and get browser path, and get current node looks nice to me. So let's enter it. And as it is a function, you get as a preliminary result in the console, okay, this is a function. So just enter a pair of brackets and voila, we get node 6. So it gives us a result. This is a pretty nice way to get this information. So let's just copy this and head over to our JavaScript and let's say let is a vocabulary. It's a fixed word. It defines a variable. It was called var, V-A-R, in the past, but the actual versions of JavaScript use let. And let's name this variable node ID. So I name it NID. It's my own choice. And then define this variable NID as a current node. And as we don't get no feedback here, let's throw it into the console.log and just enter the variable as the message we get here. So, oh, sorry, there is the whole line was copied. That was not my intention. So remove this guy here. And this should us give at every node change the actual node we are entering or leaving. So let's try it. I save Pano2VR to export this new version of the JavaScript file. And we see get node ID is called node ID number 6. If you reload a Pano2VR project in the browser, there is always an initial node change when the first node is called. So it doesn't need to wait for the panorama to load it and then put a first call. It is already happening at the beginning, and now we are going to node 1. Well, let's clear it, everything, and let's remove this stuff here. And now we see here it's get node ID 2. So we get this information from the panorama object, from the Pano object via the JavaScript API of Pano2VR. This is one method to get such information. And if you want to know more about this, then you should go to the JavaScript API and just hit Command or Control F and type get node. Or usually, if you're looking for a programming vocabulary, write it together and then you get Pano get node IDs, get node user data, or get current node, or whatever. So this gives us the first part of the information we need. And now let's try to get this into this text box. This will happen in the next clip. As we have the needed information grabbed from the Pano2VR Pano object, let's now add some text to it to learn about how to operate with the strings, with character chains. And I'm going to the JavaScript file, and now let's add another line and say let text. And now I want to have some strings. Let's say I want to have we are now, and I want to have it we are now in node 6, or we are in node 6 now. Let's do it this way around. And if you want to add a variable into a text, you need a plus sign. The plus sign is usually a mathematical operator, but if it is used in a context with a string in JavaScript, it is meant as a concatenation of text parts. Let's enter NID and let's enter another plus, and let's enter now exclamation mark, and now we have a text where this is entered as a word, the variable. And let's output this, just copy it, copy, paste, and let's output this text to check whether it's working. So save, reload, and we are node 4 now. There is an in missing. Let's add this. We are on node now, and let's enter this. So this is about the concatenation of text elements. You can even use numbers as variables. If a number is added to a string, it automatically turns into a string on the moment it's used. So you don't need to worry that much on variable types at this place. Otherwise you should do this, but here it's not needed. So this is the output we want to have in our text box in the lower left corner, which is planned for the next clip. In the last step of this little example, we just need to complete it by putting this variable text into the text box we introduced in the skin. We remember the node number has this class, and I just copy it, and now we enjoy the advantage of jQuery, as we only need to type $, opening a bracket, then we have a point marking that now it's coming a class name, paste it here, and if we have a look at our element here, just switch for a moment to the browser and go to the inspector and just right click on the text entry and go to inspect. Then you see we have a div. It is a box in HTML. It has a class UD node ID, and we have an inner div, I mentioned it already, which holds the text. Here you see the text. And we have now the way we need to go to change this text. And in jQuery, you not only can address an element, but you can go a little bit further and say, okay, we have this element, UD node ID, and then we want to have a div inside, and just we can use this div as a div is an element name. It doesn't need a dot in front of it. And now jQuery looks for this element with this class name, and then it looks inside of this element for a div, and this div needs to be changed as it has a text, and we want to replace this text. And this element has a property which is attached with a point, and the point, after the point you write HTML, and HTML is the content of this box. And then this HTML gets a curly brace, and now we just enter the text we want, copy and paste it here. And now jQuery should replace the text the skin is introducing here with having text standing here, and we now replacing this word text with our text variable. And this text should read, we are on node something here. Let's test it and save Pano2VR to export it. And now we have, we are on node 4 now. This text is manipulating from outside of the panorama player, and if you change the node, it should update immediately, as this function is called on all node changes. And if we go to the next place, we get node 6, node 3, and so on. So now you have the other way. First, you have a call from inside the skin outside to custom.js, and custom.js on the other way around is manipulating an element inside of the skin. And here you have seen the both ways of communication from inside of a skin, from a function call to the custom.js file, and on the other way back you have the functions here from jQuery to manipulate HTML elements in the skin from outside. And this is a pretty nice and basic example, but it shows the general principle how this is working and how you can communicate in both directions between the skin and the panorama player and an external JavaScript.